Hi, I'm Molly Clayton, and I am here with Ken Klesel, and he has written a book for Grosse Ile called the U.S. Naval Air Station Grosse Ile. Hi, Ken, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine.
That's good to see you. Why did you write this book?
Well, Naval Air Station Grosse Ile was one of the most interesting military bases ever in the United States. And I grew up in Trenton, Michigan, just across the river, and so Grosse Ile was something I knew about. My father was the chief pilot for Wyandotte Chemicals, and we kept an airplane over here at the base after it turned civilian in 1972. So I got to know the base very well from flying in and out of here with my dad. And then there'd never been a book written really about the base, and the base had such a fascinating history that when this publisher started doing books on military bases, I called them up and I said, has anybody offered to do Naval Air Station Grosse Ile yet? And they said no, and I said, well, put me down.
Excellent. What was one of the things that you found out about Grosse Ile that you thought was really interesting?
Oh my gosh, I could go on and on. Grosse Ile has such a fascinating history. Most people don't realize that the base didn't start out as a Navy base. It actually started out as an experimental airfield to build metal Zeppelins. That's how it got started. Before that, it was just grassland and farmland, and a group of investors, including Henry Ford and Edsel Ford, and Charles Kettering from General Motors, decided to join with the fellow who wanted to try to build metal blimps and metal Zeppelins. And they cleared out the whole 600 acres of the southern end of Grosse Ile to build this giant blimp hangar and start building metal Zeppelins. And then shortly after they constructed that, a small flight school opened over here too, that was started by a company called Wings Incorporated, and then it became Curtiss-Wright. And so it started out as a civilian airport, mostly for this little flight school and to build these metal blimps.
When did the Naval Station Grosse Ile open?
The Navy came here in 1927, and they acquired just a little finger of land down to the very southern tip, right there on what's now Gibraltar Bay, and they built a seaplane hangar. And it was just a single seaplane hangar and 4 little buildings behind. They were sort of late to the game as far as the airport at Grosse Ile is concerned. And they brought a couple of very early biplanes down here and put floats on them or flying them from Gibraltar Bay. And then when the Great Depression hit and the flight school closed, and then shortly after that the Zeppelin business busted, the Navy was able to acquire all the land that's now Naval Air Station Grosse Ile, and they turned it into a big Navy Air Reserve unit. And then when World War II started, it became the place where every pilot who wanted to become a carrier pilot during World War II, most of them came here first to see if they could cut it as a pilot before they went on to Pensacola, Florida to get their flight training.
Wow, that's incredible. No, I have heard, and I don't know if it's true, that George Bush was stationed here briefly.
He was. George Bush was the senior, was a torpedo bomber pilot in World War II. He flew TBM Avengers, and he was actually shot down during the war, and his entire crew was lost except for himself, and he was rescued by an American submarine. And it took many months for the submarine to get him back to the United States. He was never able to rejoin the squadron, but they put him into a TBM Avenger squadron, and he was brought here with his squadron to Grosse Ile. So he and Barbara married in January of '45, and as near as we can tell, their first permanent residence was in Trenton. They came to Trenton and rented a small house there, and he did spend about 3 or 4 months here flying with his torpedo squadron here at Grosse Ile before he moved on.
That's interesting. Anyone else we might know?
Bob Barker, the game show host. Bob Barker came here. He was a Navy pilot, and he was trained in Corsair fighters. And this was this was August of 1945, very late in the war. And just after he got trained and was about ready to be shipped out to the Pacific, the war ended. And he sent a very nice note to the Grosse Ile Historical Society saying that the Japanese heard he was coming and promptly surrendered. So he returned home at least a hero in his mother's eyes. And the last person that was interesting that was here was Donald Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld was also a Navy pilot. He flew Stoops, an anti-submarine plane. And he spent most of 1963 doing his reserve duty here at Grosse Ile before going into Chicago, and he got his last major promotion as a Navy pilot while he was here at Grosse Ile.
That's amazing. Who knew? Now, when you decided that you were going to start this book, what was the process that you used?
Well, the publisher made it very simple for us. What they wanted to do was have a book with about 200 photographs, so we could represent the various aspects of the base, and then some text along to go with those photographs. But since there had never been a book about Naval Air Station Grosse Ile's history from any major publisher, there was an opportunity here to actually tell the full story of Naval Air Station Grosse Ile, not just put out 200 photos and say this is so-and-so, or this is this airplane. So the text in our book is much more extensive than you're going to typically find in one of these books. It really, if you read it from the very first caption to the very last caption, you're going to get the entire story. And that's what we really wanted to do. We figured that this is an opportunity to finally tell the story of this really fascinating base that we had right here in Grosse Ile.
And how did you go about getting all the pictures and everything that you needed?
The Grosse Ile Historical Society was absolutely invaluable in that. The publisher likes to have at least 200 photos, and I really didn't know how many we were going to find. I had hoped we'd have enough to at least fill the 200, and as it turns out, we had about 400 to work from. So we were able to pare that down to 200 that best did the job of telling the whole story, right from the day that the Navy first started its first squadron in Detroit in about 1925, right up to today. And we're telling the story still today because the base is now an airport and it's still very active. And it's one of those rare occasions when the base, when it closed, it still exists. And we're still able to continue telling the story.
What would make this book different for somebody who's interested in history than some other Grosse Ile historical book that they might find?
Well, this book is just on the Navy base.
Okay.
And it's an opportunity to tell a very in-depth history of what the Navy base was all about. There's a great book already out on the history of Grosse Ile that touches upon the Navy base, tells a little of its history. But if for somebody who really wants to know what Naval Air Station Grosse Ile really was and what was it all about, and a lot of the little details that are so fascinating that you don't find in more of just a passing mention, it's all going to be in here. And that's what we really wanted to do with this book, was finally have an opportunity to tell the complete story as much as you can tell within 150 pages.
Were you finding the pictures and then telling the story, or did you have a story and then you had to find pictures to go along, or was it kind of a combination of both?
It was a combination of both. We knew a lot about the history from another author maybe back in the 70s, a fellow named Dick Melton, who was based here. And he did an excellent job of putting out a very small self-published book back in the 70s. That got us a lot of information, got us up to speed. It would have been impossible to do this book without Dick Melton's assistance, and I wish he was still around to thank him for that. And so using the information from that, plus some information that we were able to do on research locally, we were able to gather up enough information that we were able to then pick photographs that went along with the story at every step of the way. So there's a photograph representing all the important points that the book makes about the history of Naval Air Station Grosse Ile. And it's always nice when you can show some of the service members who are here too and say, this is so-and-so, and here's a picture of him from 1953, and it means that people who were based here can buy the book and look and go, I remember that person. Or I remember that dog. We've got a picture of a dog that was based here for a few years.
What kind of airplanes would you typically find at the Naval Air Station Grosse Ile?
Well, Naval Air Station Grosse Ile started out as a reserve base. So early in its history, up until World War II, it was generally obsolete airplanes that the Navy was phasing out that they could convert into trainers. So they would get these fighter planes, and often they would just put a second cockpit in the back, and suddenly that other plane's a trainer. And some of the planes that they got in that era, they only made 15 or 20 of these conversions, and most of them came to Grosse Ile. So Grosse Ile was the exclusive operator of a couple of their models. During World War II, the base was almost entirely Stearman biplanes, which was a biplane that was easy to fly. It was a trainer, simple plane. So these fellows who were coming to Grosse Ile to learn to be Navy pilots could get into a plane that wasn't going to kill them. And that was the whole goal, was to give them something simple, assess their abilities, to see if they were uncomfortable, if they were going to be reckless, to see if they were uncoordinated, and pass the ones who were going to be able to make it and fail the ones who weren't before they got into more powerful machines. Then after the war, the first thing they wanted to do was turn this into put longer runways in so they could bring the jets in. Well, the Grosse Ile Township didn't like that idea. So the runways stayed short, and as a result, they had to continue flying propeller planes here, so mostly they had anti-submarine planes. But one of the interesting planes they did have here was something called a Mauler. which was a giant single-seat attack plane that still holds the world record for the heaviest load ever carried by a single-engine piston plane. And they only made 150 of these because they had a 28-cylinder engine that was a nightmare to work on. And the pilots loved the plane. They call it Able Mabel. It was the AM-1. The pilots called it Able Mabel, and the mechanics called it Awful Monster. And of the 150 that they made, the majority of them came to Naval Air Station Grosse Ile, and Grosse Ile was one of the biggest operators of this mauler until they were finally phased out. But to get an idea of how much they despised them, we found one now that's been bulldozed into a hillside here still at the base.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, the wreckage of it was hauled out of a hillside recently.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting. Well, Ken, thank you so much for your time. It was great having you.
Thank you.
And thank you for telling the story.
Sure.
Clayton, and I am here today with Sarah Lawrence, the archivist for the Grosse Ile Historical Society. How are you?
Very good.
Good. It's great to be here. And we are talking today about the new book that came out by Kenneth Klesel, the U.S. Naval Air Station Grosse Ile. What kind of a role did you play in helping Ken gather his information?
Well, since I'm the archivist for the Historical Society, I am one of those that is responsible for acquiring new materials and arranging them in ways that they can be found by someone else who is doing research. And this group of photographs that were used for this book, we were very fortunate to acquire some years ago from the widow of a man who had worked at the air base. And they were probably about 400 professionally made 8x10 photographs of people and things that were going on at the air base. And so we had probably the premier collection of air base photos. So Ken realized that we probably had what he needed, so we got together and he was able to, we worked out an arrangement so that we could do this book. What I usually do with photographs is we store them in a locked filing cabinet in polypropylene sleeves, and when we know that we're going to be using them for some other purpose so that they don't get handled a lot, we actually scan them with our scanner and file them electronically. So once Ken came here and found the photographs that he wanted to use for this book, then I scanned all of them and saved them in the computer. And they have to be scanned for Arcadia. They have to be scanned according to certain specifications that they give you. And so that's basically what I did. Mostly worked with the photographs, scanned them, and got them ready for him to send to Arcadia.
Are there any photographs that are available for people to look at online?
We have none, no.
Okay.
But people can come to our archives. We're open by appointment.
Okay.
But we're open to walk-in people on Thursday mornings, and oftentimes we're inundated on Thursday mornings with people. But people can come in and
Okay.
Do some research, and we'll try to help them out. They can handle the photographs because we have them all encased in these sleeves, or they can look at our inventories and see what other kind of written information we might have on a particular subject.
Now, being an archivist, I'm assuming that when you get pictures, you need to figure out what they are of and where possibly they were taken or where they would have to be filed. How do you go about finding out that information of you have pictures in front of you?
Well, that's a problem sometimes, and I think it was a problem with these airbase pictures as well. We didn't know a lot of, we didn't know what these airplanes were that we were looking at, and we didn't know what these people were doing. So we have learned a lot over the last few years, and Claire Kester can tell you a little bit about that, I think.
Excellent, excellent. I'm Molly Clayton, and we're here today talking to Sarah Lawrence about the book, The U.S. Naval Air Station Grosse Ile, written by Kenneth Klesel. And if you would like to pick up a copy, you can do that by calling 734-675-1250, or you can order them online at www.gihistory.org. And we'll be right back. Kester. She is a member of the Grosse Ile Historical Society, and she worked on U.S. Naval Air Station Grosse Ile. How are you today?
I'm just fine, thank you.
It's great to be here with you. Could you tell me how you got started on this project?
Yes, you mentioned I work on the Naval Air Station Grosse Ile records for the Historical Society, and as that sort of a person, I am involved in our lobby museum, which is at the Township Hall, and I'm also in email contact with a large number of Naval Air Station Grosse Ile veterans. They have a community website, let's call it. And because of that, Ken, who is also a member, was able to contact me about his idea for doing this book. He said he needed some photographs, and did we have a few photographs of the Naval Air Station? And I said, we certainly do. We have more than a few. So he came up here one day last spring, I believe it was, and was overwhelmed at the number of photographs we actually had. And his idea was, let's collaborate on this. And since Sarah and I had done a book for Arcadia before, a book about the history of Grosse Ile, we decided that we would certainly like to do this with Ken, and we agreed to go ahead, and that's how it got started.
Excellent. How many hours would you say went into getting all of the information put together and the pictures chosen? And
the first thing that comes to my mind is infinity. We put in many, many, many hours, not only deciding which pictures to use, how Sarah had to scan them and so forth, putting the book together, getting the books here from Arcadia once they were published, getting them shipped to us on time. I really can't give you a number of hours.
was there a number of, were there many people working on it, or was it just the two of you and Ken?
Essentially, it was the three of us, although we certainly had help from other members of the museum committee whenever we asked for it.
Oh, that's great.
Sure.
Did you have any help from the people at the airport?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed we did. The manager of the airport, Derek Thiel, was very helpful. When Ken was up here visiting, he took him out all around the airport and let him take pictures, and was very good about helping us with this, and we certainly thank him. And members of this community, this website community, also were very helpful. They answered questions and they gave us ideas, and were very good.
Excellent. So there is an online community for Naval Air Station Grosse Ile.
Yes, there certainly is.
Claire, how did you go about organizing all of the pictures that you had? Was somebody responsible for, there was a donation that was made to the Historical Society. Were you part of the group that organized all those pictures?
I helped, yes. As I said, I really don't know how it happened, but somehow I came to be in charge of the Naval Air Station archives, and I did help with that, yes.
So if somebody were to come to you and donate pictures, who would then own those pictures?
Donations made to the Historical Society become the property of the Grosse Ile Historical Society. When a donation is made, the donor is given a deed of gift, which he signs, and on that deed, it indicates that this item now belongs to the Grosse Ile Historical Society.
Claire, what can you tell me about the layout of this book?
Well, that was essentially my job in this project. Arcadia has some very stringent rules about how they want their books laid out. They indicate how many photographs they want, how many words they want in each caption for each photograph, how many words they want at each chapter heading, and so forth. And since this was to be a little different layout for Arcadia, we wanted to have more words in the book than Arcadia usually has. The average for an Arcadia book is about 6,000 words. We have 17,000 words in our book. So when I was laying things out and getting things together, we wanted Arcadia to change their rules. Well, Ken is very persuasive, and he was able to get Arcadia to okay this for us. And I'm very grateful they did, because we do have a very good story about the Naval Air Station Grosse Ile.
Well, Claire, thank you so much for your time today. The title of the book is U.S. Naval Air Station Grosse Ile, written by Kenneth Klesel. And finding more information on the U.S. Naval Air Station Grosse Ile, you can look it up on Yahoo Groups at U.S. Naval Air Station Grosse Ile, or visit the website at www.nasgi.com.